So, if God's forgiveness is always there for us, does that mean that there are no consequences for sin? If I can do what I like and I'll always be forgiven, then why not just carry on doing whatever I want? And that would just demonstrate how forgiving God is. The reason is that there are consequences in this life and the next. Not consequences in terms of punishment from God, but consequences in terms of cause and effect, as you would expect. Consequences, for example, if we understand it in the next life, is judgment. And what's the judgment? Not God's judgment of us, but our judgment of ourselves. As Jesus said in John's Gospel, this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. We judge ourselves. And the hiding we started in this life continues by our choice in the next. If we don't open our minds to receive the loving forgiveness of God, then we continue to hide from Him. And when confronted more fully with the holiness of God, we hide away. God never stops reaching out to us, never. But we always have choice. Whether we follow Jesus or not, God never stops loving and forgiving all humanity. But if we can't believe that we can be forgiven, or we cannot forgive ourselves, then we hide. God never stops trying to help us to know that we are loved and that to know that full reconciliation is possible. And whilst He will continue to encourage us to come home, He will never force Himself on us. He gives us the free will to choose whether we open our hearts and minds and come into the light, where we find that we are fully known and completely loved, or whether, when confronted with the mess in our lives, we hide and stay in the darkness with, as Matthew puts it, weeping and gnashing of teeth. So there are consequences for the next life. And more immediately, there are consequences for this life. We all long to be accepted. And if we reject God and continue to hide from Him, we look for acceptance elsewhere. In today's secular cultural climate, people often feel that their worth or significance is directly related to their achievements. This results in a constant struggle to perform better, to achieve more, and when things don't go well, the feeling of loss of status and rejection. One of the first questions that we often ask when we meet someone is what do you do? To which the response is usually, I am not I am currently spending my time doing. The things we achieve or the roles we have become synonymous with who we are, and we only feel acceptable to ourselves and others when we are performing well. Whether that performance is to be successful in a workplace, or to be a good parent, or to have a growing church, or to have a good social life, we only feel acceptable if we are performing well. The problem in having to achieve in order to feel acceptable is that any success is temporary, and there's always something more to be done, which means there's pressure to achieve again in order to feel acceptable. And we continue around an unhealthy cycle of our achievement being who we are, forming our identity, which makes us feel acceptable, which isn't enough, so we then look to go and achieve more, and we keep going round in this way. Dr. Frank Lake, who was one of the pioneers of this understanding, called this the cycle of works. And we know we're caught in a cycle of works when our drivenness can damage the relationships that we value most, when personal criticism rocks our sense of worth, when we're unable to separate who we are from what we do, or whenever we achieve anything, there's only momentary relief and pleasure before we feel the need to achieve more. That's why it's so important for children to grow up in a home where they feel loved and accepted for who they are and not for what they achieve. Because for the rest of their life, they will be surrounded by a culture that will tell them the opposite. Our longing to be acceptable in the eyes of others is what can drive us to mimic behaviour that will make us fit in. We've all experienced or seen the pressures on children or teenagers to conform to the crowd, but these pressures are also felt by adults. This all has consequences for this life, and we end up not living life to the full. We are either endlessly chasing our tails or we're busy trying to fit in. And even if we've had incredible success, it's often never enough. Look at some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they're not satisfied, and they're still seeking more. How do we break this cycle? Well, the opposite to the cycle of works is what Frank Lake called the cycle of grace. And he uses Jesus' own story as an example. He says, when Jesus was baptized, the first thing he heard from God, his Father, was, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." Before he taught anything, before he healed anyone, before he cast out any demons, before he had any followers, before he did anything, the first thing he knew was God's loving acceptance. The knowledge of that love made him fully secure in his own identity, and all the things he then achieved flowed from that place of security. So rather than acceptance being the aim, acceptance is the start, and that forms his identity as a loved child, and the fruitfulness, everything that he achieves flows from that. But there's a need to recharge again, to come back to that place, to know whether you are loved just for who you are, not what you achieve, which gives you your identity, which allows you to keep. So as an opposite, this cycle of grace, as Frank Lake called it. When we know we are unconditionally loved and accepted for who we are, then what we do, those things that we look to achieve, come from a place of security, come from knowing that irrespective of the outcome, we are still fully loved and accepted. To be accepted, to quote Tim Keller again, to be fully known and totally and completely loved is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, it humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and it fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. And when we are open enough to receive the love and forgiveness of God, then this becomes living life to the full. Marianne Williamson says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, she says, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that's within us. And it's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. What stops us being open enough and vulnerable enough to receive the love God has for us? How can we know that touch of God's love for ourselves? Well, we're going to look at that next week as we look at the person and the work of the Holy Spirit. I hope that you can join us. But if you want to watch a little bit more about this week, there's an extra bonus video after this one that you can watch, which talks a little bit more about, okay, so what have we learned through this process of exploring who Jesus is and why he had to die? I hope you can join us for that and for next week. Bye-bye.